The church bells of Paris rang, but to me, they echoed the sound of fate. At just 13, my heart was promised to a man I'd never met, Don Carlos, Prince of Asturias. He was the son of the powerful King Philip II of Spain, a man whose reputation roared louder than the winds over the Pyrenees. I imagined a young, handsome prince who would share the weight of a crown in one of the world's greatest empires, where the sun never set. But whispers and sidelong glances from Spanish envoys soon told me something was wrong. They spoke of Carlos with cautious, cryptic words as if a dark shadow loomed over his claim to the throne. The Spanish Habsburg royal family. Even their name carried a majestic yet chilling mystery. I knew his father, Philip II, was the son of the great Emperor Charles V. His mother, Maria Manuela of Portugal, died just 4 days after giving birth to him. That loss marked Carlos's fate from the start. I heard about their tangled family tree, a web of close-knit marriages designed to preserve power and keep royal blood pure. They said Carlos's parents were double first cousins, sharing 25% of their DNA, almost like half-siblings. Even one of his ancestors, Joanna the Mad, was still alive when he was born. At first, these details seemed distant, but they soon felt like grim prophecies of Carlos's fate and the pain I would witness. Spain back then was a devout Catholic superpower, basking in a golden age of exploration and conquest. But behind the glory, immense pressure weighed on the royal line to ensure stability and succession. A healthy, capable prince was the nation's hope. Yet the rumors about Carlos sent chills down my spine. Future shaped by bloodlines, a crown. Awaiting a man haunted by his own heritage, this was no fairy tale romance, but a promise tied to a shadow of destiny. When I arrived in Spain and stepped into its grand palaces, I began hearing clearer, undeniable whispers about Don Carlos. These weren't just distant rumors, they came from people who had seen him up close. They said Carlos had been troubled from birth, one leg shorter than the other, giving him a lifelong limp, though court painters tried to hide it in diplomatic portraits. Recurring fevers plagued him, leaving his skin pale and yellow with some. Suspecting malaria, as he grew, his physical issues became more apparent. The imperial ambassador, Adam von Dittrichstein, saw Carlos at 18 and described him as having curly brown hair, long jaw, a pale face, and one shoulder slightly higher than the other. He also had a sunken chest and a small hump on his back near his waist. Most troubling was his voice, harsh and sharp, with words struggling to come out. How could a future king inspire a nation when even his speech faltered? But his physical ailments were only the surface. Far more alarming was his mental state. From childhood it was clear he was not quite stable. Emperor Charles V, his grandfather, met Carlos at age 11 and was unimpressed. He found him badly behaved, disrespectful to his Aunt Joanna, and poorly educated. Charles even hinted that Carlos should be confined in Tordesillas, where his own mother Joanna the Mad had been locked away for half a century. It was a chilling warning, a fate that seemed almost foretold. Stories from Carlos's childhood painted an even darker picture. He reportedly took sick pleasure in roasting animals alive. Once, he forced a shoemaker to cut up and eat a pair of boots he disliked. His gluttony and limited intellect were widely noted. Venetian Observer put it coldly but accurately. He has no desire to study or exercise, only to harm others. Carlos was arrogant and uncontrollable. In 1560, during a ceremony where nobles swore loyalty to him, he humiliated his father, King Philip, by repeatedly refusing to let them kiss his hand until Philip forced him. Philip once considered appointing him governor of the Low Countries, but it soon became clear that was a terrible idea. Carlos was unfit for any leadership role, and the position went to someone else. Still, Philip clung to hope that time and better education might change his son. But fate seemed to have other plans, chaining Carlos to his troubled genetics and a mind growing ever more twisted.
Let's talk about rights, because as a Roman woman, you have very few. Your property legally belongs to your husband. Your dowry, controlled by him, and if the marriage ends, only sometimes returned to your family after endless legal wrangling. Your children, also legally his. Even your name is subsumed. You often take a feminized version of his family name and lose your own personal identity with each step. Or still, your life is shaped by an unyielding double standard. Roman society expects you to be loyal, modest, and utterly faithful. A whisper of scandal, real or imagined, can mean disaster. Adultery is a crime for women, punishable by public disgrace, exile, even death. Meanwhile, your husband's dalliances are considered normal, even expected. Roman law is built to protect his interests, not yours. Your daily routine is grueling, even for the privileged. Wealthy wives may command slaves and oversee great households, but this only adds to the pressure. The cleanliness of the home, the behavior of the children, even the quality of the dinner table, are all seen as reflections of your virtue and competence. Step out of line, and your reputation, and by extension, your family's standing, could be ruined overnight. And if you dream of escaping a miserable marriage, think again. Divorce, while technically possible, is almost always initiated by the man. If you, as a woman, want out, you'll need ironclad evidence of abuse or neglect, the support of powerful relatives, and the courage to withstand scandal. Most women, even those in unhappy marriages, endure in silence, hoping to keep their children and save face for their families. Motherhood itself is no gentle reward. Pregnancy and childbirth are dangerous in any era, but in ancient Rome, they are fraught with risk. There are no hospitals, no reliable doctors. Midwives do their best, but infection, hemorrhage, and tragedy are always waiting in the shadows. Many women die in childbirth. Many more live with lifelong injuries. Yet the pressure to produce heirs never lifts. Each new pregnancy is both a duty and a gamble with your life. Loneliness can be as harsh as any law. Visits with friends or your Earth family are limited and closely monitored. Gossip is a daily threat, as is the rivalry among other women in the household, mothers-in-law, sisters-in-law, even slaves who might report your every word. Your best weapon is discretion. Speak softly, show deference, never stand out. Survival depends on being invisible, obedient, and endlessly adaptable. Every so often, you might hear stories of exceptional women: Livia Drusilla, Agrippina the Younger, and others who wielded real power behind the scenes.
The tension between Carlos and Philip II reached a breaking point, like an unavoidable storm. When the Duke of Alba was appointed to a key role in Brussels in April 1567, Carlos was furious at being overlooked. His rage exploded and he threatened or possibly tried to kill the Duke. Accounts vary, but one story claims Carlos attacked him with a knife, and Alba had to restrain him. Carlos also expected Philip to take him along on the trip, but when the king cancelled it, Carlos openly disrespected his father, plotting to flee the country without permission. Such an act could have sparked a major political crisis or even war across the Spanish Empire. More alarmingly, he hinted to his confessor that he planned to kill his father. When Philip learned from his half-brother at Christmas 1567 that Carlos was planning to escape to Italy, he decided on his most drastic action. On the night of January 18, 1568, Philip, wearing armor and a helmet, a detail that reveals his fear of his son's madness and violence, snuck into Carlos's bedroom with 4 council members and extra guards. They quietly removed all papers and weapons. When Carlos woke, he was assured he wouldn't be killed, but was immediately placed under house arrest. In despair, Carlos begged to be killed rather than imprisoned. All heavy objects were removed from his room, likely to protect both Carlos and his caretakers, and the windows were nailed shut. He was later moved to a more secure room. For the rest of his life, he was confined in a tower at the Alcazar, nearly in solitary confinement, with only guards to ensure he was never fully alone, and occasional visits from a doctor or barber. His reading was strictly limited to religious texts, and he could only hear Mass through a small hole in the wall. This was an astonishing move by Philip. At the time, He had no other sons, only 2 young daughters. Admitting even to himself that his heir was so unstable as to threaten his father and kingdom and couldn't be trusted to rule was a staggering decision, even for a modern parent. In the 16th century, it was almost unthinkable and a profound humiliation for Philip and the royal family. I know I wept for 2 days when I heard of Carlos's imprisonment, till my husband, King Philip, essentially told me to be strong. Philip tried to control public opinion and hide his son's worst behaviors. He told the Pope that despite rumors, Carlos wasn't a heretic or plotting rebellion. He was simply utterly unfit to govern. The king's actions, he said, were for the kingdom's good and in service to God. To his sister, Empress Maria, he admitted his actions pained him deeply. In other courts where Carlos's behavior wasn't fully understood, some believed he was merely punished as a warning. But Philip knew from the start that his son was beyond help, and the confinement was permanent. He stayed in Madrid, seemingly fearing a revolt might free Carlos. This was a golden cage built from fear, duty, and a father's tragic love for his son, a barrier between Carlos and the world he was meant to rule. Even in confinement, Don Carlos's unstable nature and harsh conditions drove him deeper into madness. He swung between hunger strikes and his old gluttony. Once he swallowed a diamond ring, thinking it would poison him. He even piled snow on his bed, a bizarre and self-destructive act. His determination to ruin what little health he had left quickly succeeded. In July 1568, he fell gravely ill. Philip II visited his son one last time, a heartbreaking meeting between a father and his troubled child to give his blessing. On July 24, 1568, Don Carlos died at just 23. He was buried with full royal honors at St. Domingo's Church in Madrid. Later moved to San Lorenzo in 1573, where most Spanish royals rest. Philip was said to be devastated by this tragic end, and the court mourned officially for a year. But later, fictional tales emerged to tarnish Philip's name, claiming Carlos was a secret Protestant and murdered on his father's orders, perhaps by poison or beheading. While Carlos's death was convenient for Philip in many ways, motive and opportunity don't prove a crime, and no real evidence supports these stories. Carlos was a frail, troubled young man, a danger to himself and nearly everyone around him. He died professing his Catholic faith with many witnesses present. If Philip had wanted him dead, there was no need for imprisonment. Could have been done quietly in January 1568, blamed on his known poor health. With Carlos's death, Philip had no male heir. Adding to the tragedy, Elizabeth of Valois, his intended breed also, died later that year, at 22. After miscarrying another daughter, Philip later married his own niece, Anna of Austria, showing he hadn't learned the dangers of inbreeding. Only one of their children survived childhood, a boy who became believed the intense inbreeding in the family contributed to Carlos's physical and mental ailments, but his lifelong illnesses and the near-fatal head injury in 1562 likely also played a role in his dangerous behavior. Don Carlos's story is a stark reminder of the burdens of royal lineage and the devastating consequences of absolute power, where even sacred family bonds yield to the needs of the crown. It's a tragedy of a soul trapped in a frail body and a fractured mind, a bloody legacy of a great but secretive dynasty. It forces us to ask, where is the line between a nation's needs and the destruction of humanity? And is it ever worth sacrificing a person, even a prince, for supreme power? Part 2, The Veiled Crown Asterisk. In the spring of 1569, the Alcazar of Madrid stood as a fortress of mourning and ambition, its marble halls echoing with the ghosts of recent tragedies. Don Carlos, the troubled Prince of Asturias, had died less than a year ago, his confinement and death, a wound that festered in the Spanish court. Lady Ana de Mendoza, a 17-year-old daughter of a minor Castilian noble, stood at the edge of this gilded abyss, clutching a letter that bore the royal seal. The summons was unexpected. I was to serve as a lady-in-waiting to Queen Elizabeth of Valois, the fragile French princess who had once been betrothed to Carlos, and now bore the weight of his loss alongside her own. The journey from our modest Estate in Castile was a haze of dusty roads and restless thoughts. My father, Don Luis de Mendoza, a loyal but obscure vassal, saw this as our family's chance to ascend the treacherous ladder of courtly favor. "Anna," he said, his voice stern as he handed me my mother's rosary, "the Habsburgs' reward. Those who serve well, but their court is a crucible. Guard your words in your heart." I nodded, my fingers tightening around the rosary's beads, praying for courage. I had heard tales of the Spanish quartet's opulence, its intrigues, and the shadow of Don Carlos, whose name was spoken only in whispers. But nothing could prepare me for the reality. The Alcazar loomed before me as I arrived, its towers piercing a sky heavy with spring clouds. Inside, the palace was a labyrinth of grandeur. Tapestries depicted Spain's conquests in the New World. Chandeliers cast golden light on somber courtiers, and the air carried the scent of incense and wax. Yet beneath the splendor, a chill lingered, as if the walls themselves mourned. I was led to the Queen's private chambers, my heart pounding. Queen Elizabeth sat by a window, her beauty delicate, her dark eyes shadowed with grief. 23. She seemed older, her frame weakened by loss, first Carlos, then her unborn child. "You are young, Anna," she said, her voice soft but piercing, "but I see strength in you. Serve me faithfully, and beware the court's snares. It devours the unwary." Her words, kind yet laced with warning, settled like a weight on my shoulders. I curtsied, vowing to prove my worth, but already I sensed the secret she could not yet share. My duties began simply, attending the Queen during her prayers, arranging her velvet gowns, and accompanying her to the cathedral for Mass, where the incense hung thick and the choir's hymns felt like laments. But the court was a tapestry woven with whispers, and I soon learned of Don Carlos's enduring shadow. Servants spoke in hushed tones of his imprisonment in the Alcazar's tower, his cries echoing through stone corridors. Nobles, more guarded, hinted at his instability, a prince who tortured animals, defied his father, King Philip II, and dreamed of rebellion in the Low Countries. Some pitied him, others feared what his bloodline meant for the Habsburg dynasty. "The royal blood is too pure," an old seamstress muttered as she mended a tapestry. "It breeds madness." One evening, while fetching the Queen's embroidered shawl, I overheard two counselors in a dimly lit gallery. "Philip will remarry soon," one said, his voice low. "Anna of Austria, his own niece. Another twist in the family knot." The other laughed bitterly. "If she bears a son, pray he escapes Carlos's curse." Their words sent a shiver through me. King Philip was a distant, formidable figure, his presence like a gathering storm, devout, calculating, and unyielding. I had glimpsed him at court, his face etched with the burden of an empire that spanned continents. But the mention of Carlos stirred unease. What had driven a king to imprison his only son? And why did the Queen, so gentle, seem haunted by his memory? My curiosity, perhaps foolish, led me to the palace library, a cavern of dusty tomes and forbidden knowledge. Hidden behind a shelf of Latin psalters, I found a chronicle, its leather cover cracked with age. It detailed Carlos's life, his frail body born with one leg shorter than the other, his recurring fevers, possibly malaria, his cruel whims, like forcing a shoemaker to eat a pair of boots. The text described his fall down a staircase in 1562, the near-fatal head injury, and the bizarre miracle of Fray Diego's corpse, which some claimed restored him. But the final pages were the most chilling. His confinement in 1568, his hunger, strikes, and his death at 23, alone in a tower. I closed the book, my hands trembling. Carlos was no mere victim of madness. He was a casualty of a dynasty that demanded perfection from flawed flesh. As months passed, I grew closer to Queen Elizabeth. In quiet moments, she shared fragments of her heart. One night, as we sat by a flickering fire, she traced the edge of a silver locket. "I was to marry Carlos once," she confessed, her voice barely a whisper. "He was not evil, Anna, only broken. This court, it breaks us all." Her words stirred both pity and fear. To speak of Carlos was to court danger, yet her trust in me was a fragile gift I could not betray. Then came the task that would alter my fate. One morning, as the Queen prepared for Mass, she drew me aside, her face pale. "There is a letter," she whispered, glancing at the door. "Hidden in the chapel, beneath the third pew on the left. Take it to Father Diego in Toledo. I'll know. One, not even the king." Her eyes held a plea, and though dread coiled in my chest, I nodded. What could the Queen so loyal to Philip need to hide? Is this tied to Carlos or something deeper? That night, under a moonless sky, I slipped into the chapel, its silence broken only by the creak of pews. My fingers found the letter, a sealed parchment, its wax trembling under my touch. I hid it in my bodice, its weight like a stone against my heart. The next day, I rode to Toledo, disguised as a pilgrim, my cloak shielding me from prying eyes. Father Diego, a gaunt priest with a gaze that seemed to pierce my soul, accepted the letter without a word. "Return swiftly, child," he said, his voice low. "The court is no sanctuary for secrets." I rode back to Madrid, my nerves frayed, certain I was watched. I returned to a court in turmoil. Queen Elizabeth had fallen gravely ill, her fever raging, her breaths shallow. I stayed by her side, guilt gnawing at me. Had my mission endangered her? Rumors spread that Philip suspected treason among his courtiers, his spies scouring the Alcazar for signs of disloyalty. One night, as I adjusted the Queen's pillows, she gripped my hand, her voice faint. "You did well, Anna, the letter. It was for Carlos's soul, a plea for his forgiveness." Her words stunned me. Had she sought absolution for the prince's fate, or for her own role in the tragedy? Before I could ask, she slipped into a restless sleep. On October 3rd, 1569, Queen Elizabeth died, her body too frail to endure another loss. The court draped itself in black, but my grief was personal, a wound deepened by the secrets she left behind. I was now alone with the knowledge of the letter, a dangerous burden. Days later, a guard approached me in the gardens, his voice a hiss. "The king knows of a letter to Toledo. Tread carefully, my lady." Panic seized me. Had Father Diego betrayed me, or had the Queen's confidences been intercepted? Desperate for answers, I returned to the library, seeking the chronicle. Tucked within its pages was a new note, scrawled in a trembling hand. The Queen's death was no accident. "Beware the king's wrath." My blood ran cold. Was Philip eliminating those tied to Carlos's memory? I burned the note, its ashes scattering like my hopes, but my resolve hardened. I would uncover the truth, not for ambition, but for the Queen who had trusted me, and for the prince whose story refused to die. The court relocated to El Escorial, Philip's new monastery palace, a stark monument to his faith and control. I remained a lady-in-waiting, now serving Anna of Austria, Philip's young niece and new bride. She was pious and naive, unaware of the ghosts haunting her husband's court. I played my role, smiling, curtsying, concealing my quest. Whispers among servants spoke of a hidden journal written by Carlos himself, locked in the Alcazar's tower. If it existed, it might reveal the truth about his confinement. The Queen's letter and the court's dark heart. With the help of a sympathetic guard, Juan, who had once served Carlos, I returned to Madrid under the guise of a family errand. Late one night, we slipped into the Alcazar's tower, its air thick with dust and despair. The walls bore scars, gouges from Carlos's rage, scratches that might have been words. Beneath a cracked floorboard, I found it. A tattered journal, its pages brittle, its ink faded but legible. Carlos's words were a fevered confession. "They call me mad, but I see their fear. Father seeks a perfect heir, but I am his mirror, a flawed king for a flawed empire." He wrote of his love for Elizabeth, not as a lover, but as a savior he could never reach. The final entry was a plea. "Forgive me, Elizabeth. My blood damns me, but my soul is yours." Tears stung my eyes as I hid the journal in my cloak. Carlos had been no saint. His cruelty was real. but he was a victim of a dynasty that prized power over humanity. One urged me to leave, but as we descended the tower, a figure blocked our path. Don Alvaro, one of Philip's trusted counselors, his eyes glinting with suspicion. "What business have you here, Lady Anna?" he demanded. I stammered an excuse, but his smile was cold. "The king will hear of this. Back at El Escorial, I lived in fear, expecting arrest. The journal burned in my mind, its truths too dangerous to keep, too precious to destroy. I confided in Maria, a fellow lady-in-waiting, whose brother served in France. She agreed to smuggle the journal to Paris, where it might one day expose the Habsburgs' secrets, but the cost was immediate. Don Alvaro summoned me to Philip's study, a vast chamber lined with maps and religious icons. The king stood before, a portrait of Carlos, his face unreadable. "You seek dangerous truths, Lady Anna," he said, his voice like steel. "Carlos was a threat to Spain, to God's will. Let his memory die, or you will share his fate." I curtsied, my heart pounding, but his words were a sentence. Days later, I was dismissed from court, my family's name struck from favor. Philip's decree sent me to a convent in Toledo, a gilded cage not unlike Carlos's tower. As I knelt in the convent's chapel, the rosary my father gave me heavy in my hands, I felt no regret. I had honored the queen's trust and given voice to a prince silenced by his own blood. The journal, I later learned, reached France, its pages copied, and whispered among scholars. It never toppled the Habsburgs, but it planted seeds of doubt, a crack in the empire's golden facade. The veiled crown of Spain its glory, its shame could not hide the truth forever. Ana de Mendoza bore its scar, a testament to a dynasty's grandeur and its tragic cost. In the silence of the convent, I prayed for Carlos, for Elizabeth, and for the souls caught in the crucible of power, where love and loyalty were sacrifices to a throne that devoured all.